Hello, welcome to Who's On Next, the podcast that happens on a rainy day and sometimes not a rainy day. Today I have with me an actress who's known for being the voice of Sailor Moon, on top of appearing in multiple other projects like X-Men and Rhino Junior High and Care Bears. It is Terri Hawkes.
Hello, Michael. Hello, Michael's listeners. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Are you having a good day today?
Lovely. I'm in balmy weather in Toronto, Ontario, Canada today. It's a nice sunny spring day, and the air is filled with the fragrance of blossoms and lilacs and lily of the valley, and it's really a beautiful time of year. So, yes, thank you.
It's funny I said the rainy day thing because it is raining horribly right now where I am.
In Carolina,
Yeah.
that's usually probably a little warmer than here. I spent a few weeks there a few years ago and it was beautiful. And around this time of year, if I recall, it started to get very humid. It doesn't surprise me that it's raining. Is that sort of typical for this time of year?
Well, it's funny because it was getting really warm and then it went back to getting really cold again earlier this week. Because it was getting to like 80 degrees and then like this week happened and now it's gone back to like 60.
Oh my gosh, Mother Nature is toying with you.
Yeah, no. I mean, the less humidity, the better because I hate the humidity.
Yeah, it's not easy for a lot of people for sure. I understand.
Get this started. So, what is it that got you into acting and voiceover?
Mm. Well, there two kind of separate timelines, I guess. Acting started when I was a kid. We lived in a smaller city or a town, I guess it would have been, in the States, Fort Collins, Colorado, a really vibrant theater community in that town. My father was going to graduate school there. And my mother got very involved in the local amateur theater scene. And she came home one day and she said, "Honey, I'm doing this play, and they don't have a kid to play the part of this little boy. Would you like to audition?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" I really had no idea what it was all about. I auditioned, I got the role, I got to do a really sweet and charming play with my mother, which was such a gift. And that led to three more productions in that town. As I said, a really vibrant theater community. And that was sort of the beginning of it. Then we moved back to Canada, to Calgary, Alberta, where I grew up. And my Gammy, my mom's mom, suggested that I audition for this group called the Young Canadians of the Calgary Stampede. They're kind of a singing and dancing troupe with kids from age 6 to 21. And the beautiful thing, one of the beautiful things about that group was that we received scholarships for singing and dancing lessons, and that was something that my family would not have been able to afford otherwise. So I sang and danced and learned with them for 8 years, and it was wonderful. It was a great experience, and we performed in this great outdoor grandstand show at the Calgary Stampede, this big outdoor stage. I think it was 30,000 people every night. So
Wow.
it was a professional education, yeah, as a kid. So that was a real gift in so many ways. And then the third big educational experience I had, acting school, I guess, is that I would go to the Banff School of Fine Arts in Banff, Alberta. For those of you who don't know, it's a beautiful town in the Rocky Mountains. Um, and they are renowned for having a wonderful arts school there. And at the time, they had an incredibly professional and wonderful musical theater program, which I auditioned for and attended 3 times in total. And once again, a scholarship for many of us, maybe it was for all of us. It was another amazing educational opportunity. And that led to an artistic director at the Citadel Theater in Edmonton visiting Banff and seeing me in a couple of productions and offering me my first professional stage job, a role as Norma Jean in a new musical about Hey Marilyn. And I was finishing off my undergrad at university then, and I arranged to write my exams early so that I could take advantage of this opportunity. And it was a great experience. It was a musical called Hey Marilyn, and was very rewarding. And at the end of that, I was, I guess, at a bit of a crossroads. And asked myself if I might want to try this arts world professionally, and I decided to give it a try. So here I am many years later, and feel very fortunate to have made a living in this industry for most of those years. And that's, I should say to those who don't know, that's unusual. And it's very tough to make a living in the performing arts. Not impossible, but tough. So I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that I've had the opportunities that I've had.
Yeah, I've known a lot of people. Heck, even yesterday on Twitter, I saw a voice actor I follow, I'm friends with. He had talked about how a lot of actors and voice actors have to get second jobs because a lot of them can't maintain acting as like a singular
Mhm.
career a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of arts. I went back to grad school a while ago and I studied women who work in the arts and even specifically mothers who work in the arts, not just the performing arts, but the visual arts. Um, so I ended up interviewing and writing about many, many women who were photographers, visual artists, theater artists, writers, singers, musicians. And the challenge of working in the arts uh, is profound always at getting the jobs and earning enough money. And then if one becomes a parent, there are some other additional challenges like paying for childcare, I suppose, and the shift work of many jobs in the arts, like that you're going to have to show up for work at 11 p.m. and work till the next morning. So it's very hard to arrange for childcare and all those kinds of things. And not to mention that the pay isn't incredibly great. So there are lots of challenges for people in the arts in general. And as I say, amplified if people have other additional responsibilities, like being a parent or a caregiver to someone, to an elder or someone with a disability, that kind of thing. So, yeah, yeah, you gotta love it to do it, I think is the message there. You gotta love it and be willing to accept uh, some instability in one's career and some inconveniences. And yeah, that's just kind of the reality of what is otherwise a wonderful vocation, for sure.
Yeah, because I know in the anime industry in particular, there's a lot of people who are voice actors who also double as like tech people or writers, or they have to do like multiple things for the studio a lot of the time.
Well, that makes sense to me because so often artists work one, two, three jobs to make ends meet. And that, what you just told me makes sense because it's kind of all in the same realm. And, if you get to know your profession, like in any field, you can expand from there. So for me, I started as an actor, but that expanded to writing, and that's where I spend a lot of my time now is writing for theater, film, and television, and directing as well. And I honestly think that I was able to make those transitions because of my experience as an actor. So yes, gaining experience in one area of your field can really open up doors for you in other areas.
And I guess where did voiceover come in when you were doing acting?
So thanks for asking. So although I started my career, my professional career in Alberta, and I worked in theater there, I think it was when I was doing that show, or it might have been another show about Alice in Wonderland called Alice at a theater in Edmonton called Theater 3. At any rate, one of those shows where I was working in theater, I decided I wanted to know a little bit more about other acting opportunities. And I opened what is kind of an archaic tool right now, something called the phone book. So I'm imagining not all of your listeners might have seen one of those, but it's kind of like a very large book on paper that is a substitute for the internet. In other words, you can open the pages and look for a word like I don't know, hardware, and find listings for hardware stores in your area. And so I opened the phone book, and I'm not quite sure what word I looked for, but I landed on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the national subsidized radio and television uh, uh, corporation in Canada. And there was an office in Edmonton, Alberta. And in that building, they also had a sound studio. And that sound studio, they presumably recorded the news and that kind of thing, but they also recorded radio drama. And for those of you who are too young to know what radio drama is, it's kind of the precursor to podcasts. It's basically a play that is recorded on the radio. So actors have scripts, they read from the scripts, there's somebody who does sound effects, which is really fun, like crunching gravel when people are walking in the play and maybe breaking a glass if there's a scene with a lot of conflict and glasses are broken. But they're live. They're not recorded. They're not pre-recorded. There's actually someone there who does the sound effects in synchronized with the actors, which is really kind of exciting. So it becomes a very collaborative affair with a sound engineer in the booth, with the actors in the actual studio, and the person doing the sound effects in the studio, and the director slash producer on the other side of the glass, kind of leading us with hand movements almost. And the producer of that first show I did was a man named Fred DL. And I remember him so fondly because he gave me my first job as a voice actor in CBC radio drama, but also because he was like a conductor. If you can imagine someone standing behind this big this platform with all these uh knobs and buttons and so on, and a sound engineer there, but someone standing kind of to the side of the sound engineer with his arms extended like a conductor, like a big V up in the air, and then he brings his hands down if he wants you to, speed up or end the beat in the scene. And he would just kind of lead us through it with this conducting. And I've worked with many directors over the years, and no one quite looks like a an orchestral conductor as much as Fred DL. And so I have a lot of very fond memories of him with that show and then many others. He subsequently hired me often when I moved to Toronto, and he was producing radio dramas there. And yeah, for that period in my life, I'm very grateful to Fred DL.
With that, because I mean, I've always seen a lot of like behind the scenes radio stuff, like from like the 40s and 50s. Now, when they would have to coordinate sound effects and you guys all together, like, would you guys usually do like a sit down prior to the radio, or would you just do like a test taping, or like what would you guys do for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Normally, our budget allowed at the time for a read through of the script. So, in that first one I did with Fred DL, it was a small cast. It was kind of a serial production. So it was 15 minutes after the news every rush hour, kind of for 5 days in a row. So we got to know each other pretty well. And so a read through would be fairly familiar, let's say. There are other shows that I was involved in, like a series called The Scales of Justice, which was very interesting. They'd have a new story every, I'm not sure how long, but let's say once a month. George Jonas was the director. He was a journalist and a brilliant guy. And they had a consultant, Eddie Greenspan, who was renowned as one of Canada's most successful criminal lawyers. So this series, you might imagine, was about some very real court cases and very dramatic court cases and the stories behind the court cases. There were dramatized versions. So that was really wonderful and very exciting. And there were some brilliant episodes produced in that series, but it was a new cast with every show. So although I was involved in quite a few of them, I would play a different character, and we would have different cast members. So my recollection is that we took a little more time for the read-throughs for those because we're trying to get to know the other actors, the director slash producers trying to get to know us. And also, uh, some of some of those stories were, as you might imagine, kind of complex with a lot of legal nuance and a lot of facts that we needed to be very accurate about. So it was a slightly different tone than the purely fictionalized radio dramas that I had been involved with. So At the time, yes, we did do read-throughs. They served a variety of functions, and we didn't generally hear the sound effects at the time, but for sure the person doing sound effects was there taking notes and kind of planning, and the director producer might stop us for a moment and say, "Oh, I'd really like to hear blah 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 there." I don't know, rain on the sunroof there, that kind of thing. So then the sound effects person would go away and figure out how to recreate that sound. So it was
As-
lovely. It was a very collaborative art form.
And I guess with animation, because there's been things you've been in things like Care Bears, and again like the '90s X-Men show and Sailor Moon and things like that. And I guess of all those, what was there ever one that you liked the most out of all the stuff you had done voiceover wise?
Hmm. I've been really fortunate. There have been a number of shows and episodes that I've really connected with and uh, really felt that I had the opportunity to bring a unique character to life. And I like them all for different reasons. So you mentioned Care Bears, and I'm very fond of Care Bears in general because so many young people have said that it was, a big part of their childhood. And there was just a sweet innocence to that show for the most part. And, until Shrieky, the villain, whose voice I also played in Baby Hugs, um, would sort of enter the fray and the tone changed. But even though she was a villain, I never considered her all that menacing. I think there was always the sense that, the Care Bears would prevail and those villains would get their comeuppance. So that was I loved the tone of that series very much. I was very fond of it. Sailor Moon also, as you mentioned, was one of my favorites, and it was for various reasons. So I know that it's now considered the gateway to anime, although we didn't really understand that at the time. The artwork was unique and it's just kind of a different form that Naoko Takeuchi is responsible for in that particular series, the creator of Sailor Moon. But she also did something that I think was very unique and groundbreaking for the time, which is that she created a group of superheroines. So it wasn't just little boys being heroes or men being heroes. It was girls who were heroines and girls who set out to fight the Negaverse. And not only powerful superheroines by by moonlight, but vulnerable and imperfect schoolgirls by day. And so I think what she did was she captured the vulnerability of the girls, the imperfections of the girls, and in particular Sailor Moon. We learned a bit more about Sailor Moon's home life, her klutziness, her saying things that weren't entirely appropriate, her willingness to kind of look at herself and have a sense of humor about herself and kind of just go with the moment, even though she knew she had screwed up sometimes. And I think that was really important in helping not just young people, but there were college age people who really were glued to that series as well, and presumably older ones as well. So for many different age groups, my theory is that the characters that Naoko created really allowed people to resonate with the characters because they saw themselves in the characters through the vulnerability, the imperfections, as well as these bouts of strength and determination and the amplified power that the girls, in this case, the Sailor Scouts, accessed when they connected with each other and asked for help and worked together as a team instead of trying to combat challenges on their own. And I think that those were just a few of the kind of the life lessons or the philosophies that the writers created for Sailor Moon and the Sailor Scouts. And I think those, in some senses, were newish stories and thus really garnered a following and a lot of loyalty among the viewers of Sailor Moon. And to me, they were really meaningful stories. They were meaningful at the time, but I have to say, since we recorded the series, they've actually gained even greater meaning because I've spoken to so many people who are so loyal to the series and have shared very personal stories with me, for which I'm very grateful. Stories about how the stories in Sailor Moon and the affirmations and the positive mantras and the girl power and the power of teamwork, etc., how all of those things helped many people through challenging times in their lives. So I've heard stories about young people whose parents were going through divorce and how tough that was, and how they used to watch Sailor Moon and they'd hear some words of wisdom that really helped them kind of get through those moments. And then I've heard from people that were grappling with their sexual identity that the implication of a same-sex relationship in Sailor Moon helped them come out and identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I've also heard of people who were very challenged in terms of mental health. And I heard from at least a couple of people that at different points in their life, their mental health was was very challenging, and they were suicidal. And part of their healing journey uh, was accessing some of the strength that they were able to kind of draw on through some of the stories that they saw in Sailor Moon. So I'm just kind of sharing what I've been told, and I trust and believe that those stories are true. And I'm very honored that they were shared with me. And it has made me have an even increased appreciation for the show. And though the show, like the characters, is not perfect, uh, it seems to have brought a lot more positive messaging and influences into the world than the converse, for sure. There's a plane going overhead, or a helicopter. Hold on a sec. Wait, wait. I think I see some Sailor Scouts up the tail of that helicopter. No. Okay. There, I think it's a little quiet now.
I I was gonna say because Sailor Moon was one of those things also because there was during that time there was Dragon Ball and Pokemon and like a lot of these big gateway shows, and Sailor Moon was a series that also had been redubbed a few years ago because I had spoken to one of the original actresses to the first dub of One Piece, and I remember asking her what her perspective was on the fact that there was the original version of the dub, and now there's this newer dub where they were able to keep in things that maybe the original version wasn't allowed to do. And I know that's been a thing some people have talked about, how in the original version they weren't allowed to do the lesbian relationship as accurately as they wanted to do it. But I guess what is your perspective now that there's basically these two different versions of Sailor Moon?
Well, I have to say I'm not that familiar with the second dub. Um, my understanding is that the same-sex relationship that you're referring to was more evident in the Japanese version, the original version, and that through the translation to English, when it kind of crossed the water there, and um, we were now dubbing in English, that had been watered down. But a general rule in the world of acting, theater, film, and television is when you receive a script, it's generally been vetted and approved in film and television. And in theater, generally the written word is the domain of the playwright and remains so unless the playwright decides to change the words. So I have a lot of reverence for the written word. So I normally probably never would change words without it being a collaborative discussion that was agreed to. Now, I many times would have raised questions about certain lines and certain messages, and I did so in Sailor Moon many times. Um, and with other shows as well. And occasionally we were able to make an adjustment with the approval of the people who had the rights to the show. But there's nothing that I can remember specifically about that we changed. There were certain tones that we changed, and there were implications that we thought suggested that there was a same-sex relationship there. And I think that could have gone further. I think if it had been recorded today, 20 plus years later, it likely would have been. Um, so as I say, many of these stories were imperfect, at least from my point of view, and could have been improved upon. And yet, for the time, they did make some progress, I think.
Yeah, no, because Sailor Moon was one of those things where looking back on it, it is, for the time it was made, very, very progressive show, even with things that they might like. Because if I recall correctly, I don't remember if they were able to dub the entire show in the original dub.
In terms of all the episodes,
Yeah, I don't. I might not be. I might not be correct, but I want to say that the original show wasn't fully dubbed, or at least they didn't get to finish dubbing the entire show.
I don't know the answer to that. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to leave this series before we had finished all the episodes only because I was pregnant with twins at the time and on bed rest for much of my pregnancy. And it was a very physical job, at least the way I did it. I was leaping and fighting the Negaverse physically as well as vocally. Uh, so I prioritized my pregnancy, and I can't tell you about the last episodes if they completed every single one. I thought they did, but I can't verify that.
I guess that was actually something I was wondering because Sailor Moon had three voices because you were the second voice, and
Hmm.
I had wondered why. What was the reason that they ended up recasting it with you?
Yeah, so the original actor to play Sailor Moon for the first, I think, six episodes, just a few at the beginning, is Tracy Moore. And Tracy also was the voice director for those six episodes, I believe. Tracy's a very talented voice actor, and synchronistically, she and I did community theater together in Calgary, Alberta, many years ago. Anyway, my understanding is that Tracy and the producers had artistic differences. And so she left the show. And they were recasting and trying to do it very quickly because they wanted to go back and catch up. And so yeah, I was cast in a hurry. I think I was working on an episode the same day that I was cast in the series. So they needed to catch up a bit, but we did catch up and then went on to do over 100 episodes and three films. And that original cast was so fantastic. I must tell you, you probably know all this, but the Sailor Scouts, Katie Griffin, Susan Roman, Karen Bernstein, Stephanie Morgenstern, and then we had Jill Frappier as Luna, and Ron Rubin as Artemis, and Toby Proctor as Darian. Those names are some of the best voice actors in Canada. It was an incredible cast. And then we had all these guest artists. There was Mary Long and Julie Lemieux and Ellen Gibbon and um, just like this list of who's who in Canadian voice acting. I'm sure every major voice actor in Canada was a guest artist on one of these episodes. So it's that in itself was just an incredible achievement and opportunity. It was the script. It absolutely was the storyline and by Naoko Takeuchi and the other writers, and it was the groundbreaking aspect of it being an early anime series, and it was the thematic components of girl power and teamwork and positive affirmations and imperfections and all of those things. But it was also the cast. And I will say, and the main director, I guess they would have brought Roland in around the same time they brought me in, but the director I worked with most was Roland Parliament. And he was a wonderful director and easy to work with, had great ideas, was very talented and experienced, and Saul as the engineer and Cole as the producer. It was just really a great team and such a gift for all of us. So that in itself is really special.
Yeah, yeah, and that actually was actually kind of segues into my next question. You've done voice direction on a few occasions, and I guess what was the thing that made you want to start doing that?
Well, I think you alluded to it a few minutes ago when you said people sometimes work in different areas. Once you start to feel comfortable with what you're doing, you work a certain number of years, a certain number of hours, and you start to see things that um, maybe you hadn't seen previously. And I'm always learning, or at least I hope to be learning and expanding. And I was asked often to coach people for auditions for voice acting, and I never did it professionally. I was happy to do it, but it also uh, led me to see that I had an ability there, and that all my years of acting training, I didn't even tell you about that, but I've studied with some really wonderful teachers in Toronto and New York and LA, and I've learned a lot, and I'm happy to pass that along. And I also think that that background is really like gold to a director because to understand the actor's process, and there are many different techniques in acting, and I've studied a few different ones. To understand that really gives you a bit of a head start as a director because hopefully you're speaking the same language as the actors, and yet you can step back and kind of be objective and listen, and then having done it oneself, it helps to be able to understand what the actor is going for and how one might support them in their interpretation of the role. So I actually started voice directing around the same time I did Sailor Moon, and I know there were a few times Roland was not available to direct, and Nicole asked me to do so, and that was great. It was a wonderful opportunity. And then I started to direct my own series, and since then I've directed on camera and in theater, and I really enjoy that process as well, very much.
One of the last things I wanted to ask, well, before I get to the final question, was in recent years you haven't done a lot like much animated voiceover work, but there was a very big one a few years ago, which was Bee and Puppycat, and I was
Hmm.
very intrigued to know how you got that.
Well, that I'm told is kind of a direct result of Sailor Moon. So you're right. As I was raising my family, I cut back on certain jobs that weren't very family friendly in terms of hours and location and time and that kind of thing. And I started to write a bit more, where I had more control over the timing of that work. So I did less voice work for a number of years and less on camera work. I've started to shift that again because now my kids are launched. So I've been doing some more camera work on a web series in particular called Lady Ada's Secret Society on Marvel Kids YouTube. And then Bee and Puppycat just came to me, which is such a gift. That doesn't happen all the time. And Natasha Allegri, who's an animator and writer, created the series, and she knew my work from Sailor Moon, and she offered me the role of Toast, who's a villain, I guess you would say, but to me, an adorable, endearing, wacky kind of villain. And I was happy to do the role, and I really like working with Natasha. And it's a lovely series, and it's beautifully drawn and illustrated and wrought, and it's been such a pleasure. And I know it's on Netflix right now, and I'm told that there might be a few more episodes in the works, but we'll see. That would be great if that happened.
I did wonder what because Toast has a very unique voice, and I was wondering what was the direction for that character.
Oh, I can't remember a specific direction. Certainly, well, she's a boxer, for those of you who don't know. So she's tough and she's built, like she's strong and capable and reactive, I think is fair to say. She'd probably rather punch than talk something out. So a little different than Sailor Moon for sure. Um, she speaks her mind. So I think of her as being forceful, strong, but once again, imperfect and maybe a little insecure, which she covers up with this facade sometimes. And also, I really looked for humor in Toast. I look for humor in all of my characters and in all the scripts I write as well, because number one, it's fun. Number two, I think the audience really likes humor, especially when we're exploring difficult subjects. I think that's a great opportunity to look for the humor in the situation, because I think that's what we do in life, really. And I wanted to find humor in Toast, and so I think between among the writers and uh, the director and me, I guess we have found some humor in that character, and that makes me feel like we've accomplished something. Yeah.
Because Toast was like one of my favorite characters, and it was primarily because I just liked the voice so much. It just just very, I don't know, just very odd, unique delivery that I just really liked with that character.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with me.
I guess last question before we end this is: what advice would you want to give to people who are interested in acting or voiceover?
Well, I can kind of I'll relay what I generally say to people. First of all, I can't make that decision for anyone, but what I can share about my experience is something that I've shared earlier in our discussion today, which is that it's a mercurial business, goes up and down. It's sometimes inflexible, not very family friendly hours. And it's unpredictable. It's hard to know if you're going to make money to pay the rent. So it's not for everyone. And it's not just acting, but it's really the arts in general. It's not generally known to be a high income earning field, and the odds are often against someone earning a livable income in the arts. So if it's something that you really enjoy, but if there's something else in one's life that you're passionate about, uh, it might be worth considering a different direction. And at the same time, if your particular area of the arts is something that you can't imagine living without, if it just fills you up so much, fills your soul, and you know that's how you would like to earn a living, then it might be worth giving it a shot and giving it your best try and reaching out for help and taking all the classes you can and giving it your all to see if you can make a go of it. Almost all of the actors I've ever met and writers and directors work really, really hard, often in the beginning at least for no pay, and persevere. And the ones who persevere are the ones most likely to make a living. So just go into it with your eyes open, I would say. I'm not sure that I did go into it with my eyes open, but it turned out okay. But I will say that I worked pretty hard for sure, but not just by myself. A lot of people worked hard, and there is joy in community. So, and that's the other thing. If you don't end up pursuing it as a profession, there are many community opportunities, community theater, student films at colleges near you that need volunteer actors or people painting sets or musicians or that kind of thing. So there are community amateur opportunities out there if you look for them. And some of those opportunities have been some of the most joyous in my career. I now direct occasionally for an amateur theater company. And the people in that community just do it for the love of it. And that brings me back to my childhood, as I shared. That's where I started in community theater. And that's pretty great. That is a pretty great community to explore and to join.